So today we are going to talk about elastic IP address. So elastic IP address always a static IP address that designed for dynamic cloud computing. So once we launch the EC2 instance in a AWS infrastructure, in a AWS infrastructure, it take the IP address. The EC2 instance take the IP address, and that IP address is not elastic IP address. So elastic IP address only address is a static IP address. Static means like it's not gonna be changed. It's on always is gonna be fixed, like fixed. Also, an elastic IP address is a public IP address which is reachable from the internet. If your instance does not have a public IP address, you can associate elastic IP address with your instance. So there is an option to associate your elastic IP address with your instance. So once we going to be start hand-ons, I'm going to show you how to attach elastic IP address, right guys? So next slide, every time when you stop and start your EC2 instance, the public IP address of the instance could be changed. So I tell you, so this is not the elastic IP address. If you don't want to change your IP address, you need to have elastic IP address, right? If you need have a fixed public IP, that is elastic IP. Fixed public IP is called elastic IP. So you need to use an elastic IP, right? Elastic IP is a public IP that can be attached only one instance. It cannot be attached with the more than one instance at the time, right? So the second thing, like elastic IP address, you can mask the failure of an instance by rapidly remapping the address to another instance in your account. You can also, like, you can have 5 elastic IP, only 5 elastic IP address in your account. So you can contact with the AWS if you need further more IP addresses, elastic IP address. So I'm gonna give you example. So like this is my EC2 instance right here, EC2 instance, and it does not have elastic IP address. It attached with the public IP address, but it's not elastic. So my client, I web host here in EC2 instance. My clients, they are contacting my website, right? They are getting information from the website. Somehow my EC2 instance get restarted, right? So it will get another IP address, different IP address, and my client cannot connect. Now my clients are blocked to access my EC2 instance, right? The website. So that's why we use elastic IP. Elastic IP is fixed, static, and once you restart your server, whatever EC2 machine, virtual machine, it won't be changed IP address, and our client can easily access the same machine they were using, right? Now I'm going to show you guys how to use elastic IP before going for before we going to attach elastic IP. We need to launch EC2 instance. So I have one instance is running. It has the IP address 63 right here. This is a public IP address, right? This is a public IP address. Once I restart or reboot or stop my EC2 instance, the IP address will change. So let's do it. Action, instance. Okay, I'm gonna stop it, right? So it says yes, stop it. It's going to be stopped. So it is stopped right now, and IP address is gone. So before stopping, I took the screenshot. In the screenshot we have the IP, public IP right here. I'm gonna restart, reboot, or start my EC2 instance. Let's see, it's gonna change the IP address. So I restart my machine, the web server, as I mentioned, Windows web server. Now I have, like, before I used to have like this was my public IP address, now is my IP address is changed. So that's the issue. So elastic IP, once we attach elastic IP with the EC2 instance, the issue will be fixed. Always we have a static IP, it's not gonna be changed after we start or reboot your reboot your EC2 instance. So how we can attach elastic IP? So we need to go down here, open tab for elastic. So now we are going to allocate new elastic IP first, right? Amazon pool owned by me, or Amazon pool, right? So now we have elastic IP, one elastic IP, and now we need to associate with the EC2 instance, right? So associate address, click here to associate with the Windows server is running, right? So this is the IP, private IP, private IP of with the Windows web server.
Okay, so now if you go with the EC2 instance,
so here you can attach the private IP or not, as you wish. I won't recommend, only just mention the instance web server, which is the web server, right? And then associate. This is been associate. Let's go back to the EC2 instance.
okay, even after,
So this is our instance. It's not our instance. We need to go back to the EC2 instance dashboard. So one is running right here now. So now you can see, like, there is a public IP address, this is the elastic IP, right? So now this machine has elastic IP address. So once we restart or stop or reboot our system, the IP address will be same. So I'm going to take a screenshot before we start, right? So here you go, and I'm going to restart my machine, or stop and restart, whatever. First stop. So EC2 instance is stopped, but IP address is still connected, right? It's not go away. Last time we stopped it, and you guys have seen, like, there was a blank, there was no IP address. I'm going to start my EC2 instance again. So now my web server is running, and I took this screenshot right here, right? So you guys can see the my IP address, it won't change. Is still the same IP address, elastic IP, and public IP is same, right? So it's same. So our customer won't have any issue. We don't need to send every time IP address to connect our web host web server, right? That's okay. This is not free elastic IP. You need to delete it, otherwise AWS is gonna charge you. So somehow your web service stop working, you can reuse the elastic IP with the other instance, right? So first we need to deassociate elastic, as I mentioned, elastic IP is not free, so you need to release it first and then close, terminate it. So here you go, action, click on action. First deassociate your IP address. If you shut down your EC2 instance, elastic IP will stick with your EC2 instance, or you terminate your EC2 instance, elastic IP will be associate, right? And is going to be charge you like you thought like it's been deleted everything, but it's not, right? So once you deassociate, now you need to release the elastic IP address, right? Once you release, it will go away, right? Now you don't have elastic IP open here. You are good to go. You can goes to EC2 instance dashboard and shut down or terminate your instance web server. You can terminate. Now you don't have elastic IP is gone, you guys can see here. So AWS not gonna charge you. Okay, see you for next class.